Hi, back in session with Professor P. I've missed you guys. I hope you guys are staying healthy and safe. Okay, today we're going to talk about applied anthropology. Up to this point, you guys have been learning about all these cultural traits, right? You've been learning about the field of anthropology, the applied part of anthropology. It's called applied anthropology, practicing anthropology, political anthropology. It's a completely different area in the field of anthropology. This is now where you're doing applications to solve global social problems. How can we now make our knowledge useful? Typically, you're employed outside of academia. You could be working, for public health agencies, medical institutions, nonprofit organizations, community development agencies, charitable, organizations. You're doing stuff outside, right, of school. All right, let's get to program development. Remember, follow along on your concept sheets because they can be really useful. All right, the next term is program development. You always have to understand program development because you're changing policy, you're putting something into practice. There's 5 things you need in program development. 1 is assembling the knowledge. What's going on in the society? What's the problem, right? Assembling the knowledge. 2, developing a plan. What's your plan of action to go out there? What's your plan of action to solve the problem or to help alleviate the problem? 3, assessing social or environmental impacts. So if you make a change, how is it going to affect other parts of the society? When you make one change, it typically affects other areas. We got to understand that impact. Then, number 4, implementing the program or implementing the change, actively doing the change, right? And you're working with the society to do that. The last one is monitoring the program long term. So after all those steps are done and we leave the society, right, you still have to monitor, is the change effective over the course of a few years? All right, we have to understand this. All right, your next term on the concept sheet is forensic anthropology. A lot of you guys watch CSI and Bones and, these kinds of things. Forensic anthropology is really understanding mass death and really solving crime. All right, we'll talk about a little bit about that in a few minutes. The next term is social impact work. Social impact work is typically work that's funded by a government or a private agency. Funded by a government or a private agency. CRM, the next term there, would be something funded by the government. CRM is called cultural resource management. We utilize this in the field of archaeology. Cultural resource management is where we help to preserve and record the record before it changes. So, for example, we need to savor things, right? So before a dam is built, we got to remove things, right? So CRM really wants to understand that. CRM also will be active where if new housing developments are built or new highways are built, new constructions there, CRM has to go out and make sure there's nothing of cultural significance in the ground. There's no fossil remains. There's no bones. There's no artifacts and fossils and things like that, right? They have to actually excavate it before the plan change occurs. They have to make sure there's nothing there. There's different policies behind that. All right. The next terms on there are basic versus applied work. Up to this point, you've learned about basic anthropology, right? You've analyzed cultures. You've analyzed participant observation and fieldwork. You've even tested theories, right? You've even seen some problems in societies. Applied work, what we're talking about now, you're actively implementing a change and a program. You're actively making changes. It's different. A lot of people don't have degrees in both. So sometimes you might go to a university and they only do basic anthropology, not applied. Where I went to college, one of their main things was doing applied work. Active anthropology, right? Political anthropology, right? Rapid anthropology. We actually were on many different projects doing applied work, all right? Which, we could talk about in a little bit, but I was on, Migrant Title I program, programs where we were instituting, mental health care. There's different kinds of things that we do within the applied venue. All right, now let's talk about the history of applied work. There's not much. Early on in the 1930s, there were anthropologists who were upset at the way Native Americans were being treated, put on reservations, reservation conditions, but there really wasn't a lot. Not until the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, then there was a discussion in the late 1960s for change, right? Needing people to help with this. And then the field started to become a little bit bigger at that point. Society for Applied Anthropology comes about in the 1940s. Society for Applied Anthropology is an organization where applied anthropologists get together. They do conferences, networking, they go to different places in the United States and they come together as a discipline. I am part of the Society for Applied Anthropology. I'm part of the Latino Anthropology Organization and obviously, right, the AAAs, which is the American Anthropology Association. So these kinds of organizations continue to build collaboration within the field. And that becomes a significant part of anthropology. All right, let's get on to our code of ethic. We in the field of anthropology have a code of ethic. When you go out and you do field work, we have to maintain, right, our code of ethic and an ethical code, which is this. The statement came out in the late 1940s, and it was sort of revised in the late 1980s. But really, it's the things we can and cannot do when we're in the field. One of the most important ones is that our target population, the culture that we are studying, the culture that we are with, the culture we're making change with, they're our priority. We can't take any action that's going to harm them. Okay? Another one is that anything we publish has to be truthful and honest, right? So there's a lot. These things are not just black and white. There's gray when we talk about a code of ethic. Things happen when we're in the field, right? So that becomes important to understand. All right, let's get on to the next one. The 3 barriers that actually could hinder change within a culture. There's 3 barriers that can hinder change. One is called a cultural barrier. Let me tell you what a cultural barrier is. It's where the society may have a cultural resistance to change because their beliefs are different. I can give you an example. Anthropologists may go and work in China, to work with maybe prostitutes and sex workers. And maybe medical anthropologists go because they want to help alleviate the spread of AIDS and HIV within that community. Well, if they don't have a concept of wearing condoms, we might have a disconnect. Because in certain parts of Asia, they don't promote wearing condoms, right? That's taboo to talk about, sexual intercourse. So at that point, there might be a cultural resistance until they understand that methodology can alleviate the transfer of AIDS and HIV, right? So these are the kinds of things. Another barrier would be a social barrier. And this is actually interesting because it's really about the anthropologist and the population. If the population believes the anthropologist is socially similar to them, they may accept the change more. For example, if I'm female and I'm Latina and I work with that population, maybe they're going to accept the change more. Maybe they see a similarity or commonality. The last one is a psychological barrier. That's perception. That is how the individuals perceive the change and the change agent, right? Which would be me. If their perception is that it's not good for them, they may not accept it, right? Perception is hard because it's really psychological, right? So we have to understand that. The last term on that concept sheet for applied work is forensic anthropology and Clyde Snow. Forensic anthropology is awesome. It's one of my favorite areas. But forensic anthropology is where we're analyzing mass death and solving crime. It's not always about crime, though. It could just be major and mass death. Airplane accidents, train crashes, terrorist attacks, right? Multiple deaths. It can also be because there's crime involved, like serial killers and things like that. Clyde Snow is considered to be the father of forensic anthropology. He was on major, some of the most famous cases in the world to solve crime and punishment. He was on the JFK shooting. He has been hired all over to solve mass death as well. He did a lot of his field work in Argentina and Guatemala where there was civil strife. He went out to find mass graves and to give the dead back to their loved ones. He died a few years ago of cancer. But his father, he said his father was a doctor and he was never scared of the dead. He helped his dad, with the dead. So he really wanted to be an advocate and to speak for them. One of my favorite cases he was on was in the 1980s where a plane crash went down and it had some NFL players on it. And the plane crash goes down in the bayous of Florida where you have alligators in there. And they hired him. They gave him a bunker to find the pieces of the plane and the ones he didn't find to do a life-size model. Could you imagine how big that was? And then they asked him questions like, how many people died because they were ejected from their seats, they hit their head? How many people, lost consciousness, right away? They wanted him to find the black box and reconstruct it, which he did. within this field, he hires a lot of people like cultural anthropologists, maritime anthropologists, which are underwater divers. In that particular case, he hired them to excavate the alligators, put them to sleep, pump their stomachs to see what was there. Really cool field. Clyde Snow was also an attorney and a judge. So this guy did a lot of things. And early on in the field of anthropology, forensic anthropology wasn't really appreciated, right, in the detective and police arena. And now they're really sought after. And so it's a great field to get into if you're really interested in solving crime. Well, that's the chapter on applied work. I hope you guys stay safe. See you next time with Professor P.